What's up everyone, it's your boy Walt. So last time I talked about the very beginning of modern Fire Emblem stories and was comparing them to Engage. So for this video, I'm going to talk about the middle, as in the big turning point in Engage's story, or in other words, the Don't Speak Her Name sequence. To make things interesting, I'm going to compare it to the original Don't Speak Her Name sequence that came from Awakening. Before anyone says it's unfair to compare these two sequences as in they're completely different, well, both start with the heroes having doubts about whether their plan will work, both have the villains gain the upper hand using a surprise trick, both involve the important family member getting killed, both involve the main character wanting to keep fighting, but then their best friend tells them they have to run away. Both have chapters where in the final chapter of their sequence it's raining and sad music is playing and the general tone and atmosphere is dreary. And finally, both sequences end with the main character being angsty and feeling like a failure, and then getting picked back up by their friends in a "we may have lost today, but we will recover from this" type of moment. Hell, both of these sequences even take place at the exact same points in their stories, it being both Awakening and Engage's 11th and 12th main story map. Because while in Awakening the sequence starts on chapter 9, if we count the premonition and prologue, it's the 11th main map. Whereas with Engage, well, it starts on chapter 10, it's actually the 11th main map if we count the prologue. So narratively, tone-wise, aesthetic-wise, and structurally, Engage tries to mimic and emulate this sequence from Awakening. And really, I'm only scratching the surface on comparisons between the two sequences. There is one key difference though. One of these sequences is one of the most powerful and artistic moments not just in gaming, but in terms of media consumption in general. And then the other one is an absolute garbage fire embarrassment of a sequence. If you read the title of the video, you can probably guess which one is which. So first, I'm going to go over what made Awakening's Don't Speak Her Name sequence work so well, and then show how Engage's Don't Speak Her Name sequence fails spectacularly. Before we begin, if you guys really enjoy this in comparison to my usual content, let me know by leaving a like, comment, or subscribing. The benchmark I'll use is if this video gets either 1,000 views, 50 likes, or 10 different people comment on it, I may consider making more videos like this or talking about Engage even further. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin. So in Awakening at the beginning of chapter 9, tensions are at an all-time high on whether Robin's plan to save Emeryn will work. Now, Emeryn is a character that we've grown to love throughout the story so far. She's kind, noble, and selfless to a fault. The kind of person who would rather take on pain herself than inflict it on others. We see this shown multiple times throughout the story, some examples being how Chrom describes the people of Yelisse throwing stones at her due to being disgruntled by her father's rule, yet she returning those blows with kindness. Or how Pan, despite her hatred of humans, mentions that Emeryn may be different than the rest. So Emeryn is someone the player has grown quite attached to at this point in the story. Or at the very least, we can see the impact she had on all the other characters and why it's so important for us to save her. So we beat chapter 9 and then Gangrel does a surprise attack. Then the game gives you a choice to either give up the Fire Emblem or to let Emeryn die. Now Pavai's already made a great video regarding this moment, which I'll link in the description, but the idea is the choice doesn't matter. The game wants to put you in the headspace of Chrom and really make you feel that sense of hopelessness. That no matter what we do, Emeryn dies. We are completely powerless to stop the events unfolding, as Emeryn has already made the choice for Chrom. She gives a speech about how war will only make the Plagueans more miserable, and then, feeling as if her speech did nothing, she falls to her death. But her speech did reach someone. As we see at the beginning of chapter 10, a Plaguean general named Mustafa offers us mercy if we surrender. But Chrom is far beyond that point, his grief clouding his sense of honor, and thus we are forced to fight. Now, I've seen a lot of people talk about this moment as Chrom having no choice but to kill the Plagueans here. After all, we can't just surrender at this point, we have to break our way through. But I feel it goes a bit deeper than that. Perhaps, even if such were true, it would be dishonest to assert that there wasn't a part of Chrom who, buried in his grief, is murdering these Plaguean soldiers based on feelings of vengeance, anger, and an unshakable despair. There's even foreshadowing to this side of Chrom being present when at the beginning of chapter 6, he talks about how Emeryn's sense of honor and altruism would prevent her from ever resorting to violence. A noble way to live indeed, but sometimes a show of force is necessary to prevent others from taking advantage of you and your kindness. Hence, he speaks of himself as Death's agent. It's a practical yet dark way of thinking, but now in the context of Chapter 10, we see that line of thinking combined with grief, rage, and sorrow coming out in a vicious way. Thus, even if there were a peaceful solution in this scenario, Crom's judgment is clouded to such a point that he may not even accept one. This once compassionate prince is, in this moment, so consumed by grief that he's mercilessly cutting down soldiers that clearly do not want to fight, and the rest of the shepherds follow suit. We are the aggressors in this scenario. And there's a cognitive dissonance, as the player knows what they are doing is wrong. Using the phrase, "it had to be done," is intellectually dishonest, as emotion is definitely playing a part in murdering all of these Plagueans here. Yet at the same time, while the player may not agree with Crom's actions here, we completely understand why he's doing what he's doing, and that's what's important. After all, we the player have also become close to Emeryn throughout the game so far, as the game does a good job endearing us to her. We see her as early as the end of Chapter 1, giving us plenty of time to get to know her, and then the game shows us directly her selfless nature, like her decision at the end of Chapter 7 to go be with her people despite the risks, and of course her ultimate sacrifice. Even gameplay-wise, the game endears us to her, as Chapter 6's objective is not letting Emeryn die. So the dissonance comes from our ability to sympathize with Crom's actions here, yet also disapprove of them. The tragic irony of the moment being Crom's grief over the person he loves acting in a way that goes against her final wish because of that grief. And it truly is brutal, as the game does a great job in humanizing these enemy units. They all have families and lives outside of this war. While these Plagueans may not be completely innocent in this ordeal, they are still human beings we are cutting down. And then the music and the dreary atmosphere just accentuates those painful emotions, really making the player feel that sense of dread and sorrow. And then at the end of the chapter, Robin's speech on how they will recover from this and how a bunch of the characters you recruited so far also help Crom recover, it's a solid cap to this masterpiece of a sequence. Now, I definitely want to dive deeper and talk about how this sequence kind of commentates on the nature of video games and life in general, and how it affected me personally, but that's a video for another time. The key thing to take away here is the game does a good job building up a character and getting us to like them, and then it does a good job making us feel sad about their death. And then it does a good job making us feel even more sad in the following sequence when we kill Plagueans over the grief of her death. TLDR, the writers wanted us to feel sad here, and they succeeded at doing that. Now, let's talk about how Engage handles this type of sequence. So we start off with the characters approaching the cathedral, and then Marth tells Alir they should retreat. While this is a bit of a nitpick, already there's an issue. This should not be Marth telling Alir this. It should be Leaf. First of all, yes, there are several occasions where Marth and his army do retreat. The bridge chapter in New Mystery immediately comes to mind, and it's just one of the many examples where he and his army are running away. But the amount of time Marth retreats in comparison to Leaf is minuscule. Hell, Thracia is the game that pioneered the escape map objective after all. However, that is a very surface level observation. Let's dive deeper into who Marth and Leaf are at the core of their character. Starting with Marth, Marth is the kind of character who would do whatever it takes to find a way to save everyone. It's one of his biggest strengths and also one of his biggest weaknesses. Now, there is a time when Marth does leave people behind, and that happens in the prologue of Shadow Dragon, where he needs to escape to Talus as his castle's been taken over by Gra. And then he does allow one of his allies to be sacrificed as a decoy so he can escape. But the thing is, directly after that sacrifice, he considers himself a craven. And while there are a few other decisions he makes that have a lot of moral complexity throughout his journey, he never does anything specifically like that ever again throughout his games. Up until the very end of New Mystery, this part of his character stays consistent. He always wants to do whatever it takes to save everyone, even if it takes him on a harder and less practical path. Thus, a lot of his character development throughout Shadow Dragon and New Mystery is just about him learning to become a good leader. Not that he's necessarily blind to the horrors of war, he's not completely naive, but he'll still do whatever it takes to save everyone. Now, Leaf, on the other hand, starts out with the same optimistic mindset of Marth, but gradually, Throughout the game, after so many tragedies, we slowly see Leaf's mindset subtly begin to change. The breaking point for Leaf is in Chapter 19. After so much suffering, which you feel both from the story and gameplay, Leaf has finally reclaimed Leonster Castle, his home. For once, there is something that Leaf can feel good about, a sigh of relief and triumph in an endless sea of tragedy. So when Leaf hears the villagers' plea for help in Ulster, riding the positive momentum he has been having combined with his noble and caring desires, it makes complete sense why he would jump at the chance to help them. And yet, it is simply not the rational thing to do. Dorius warns Leaf that they simply do not have the reserves necessary to counter the Empire in Ulster. Sending troops there would be a suicide mission. Augustus even tells Leaf that the victories they've achieved so far was due to the Empire's negligence due to their overconfidence, and strongly urges Leaf to reconsider. But Leaf doesn't back down. As a noble, his nature would simply not allow him to allow Ulster's citizens to be brutalized and murdered by the Empire due to his inaction. He also has a personal connection to Ulster, as that's one of the cities that protected him as a child, and he feels he needs to somehow repay that kindness. A bit of a side note, I really like Augustus's line right here. I hoped you'd grown into a man, but you still think like a child. And then, Dorius and Augustus, unable to ignore the prince's orders, basically discuss who will lead the vanguard. But they, in spite of Leaf's ignorance, know that the actual discussion is about who will ride to their death. Dorius ultimately decides to lead the vanguard. It's a very poignant scene. Dorius knows this is a suicide mission, and yet he is powerless to escape his fate. So in a lot of hero's journey type stories, this would be the moment where, against all odds, the power of determination or friendship or whatever, they're able to overcome the challenge. But Thracia takes a much more grounded approach. In reality, war does not care which side is more noble. It does not care about your feelings and desires. It is a cold, cruel endeavor where one slip-up, a single instance where you let your emotions cloud your judgment, can lead to catastrophe. And that's exactly what happens here. Dorius was killed, a majority of the troops Dorius brought with him were killed as well. Leaf loses one of his most trusted advisor, a person he's grown to really like. He's lost a huge portion of his army, and now the Empire is at Leaf's doorstep seeking to recapture Leonster Castle. And it was all for nothing. The people of Ulster weren't even saved. Leaf could do nothing but run away and fortify the castle, putting him in a position to lose what he worked so hard and endured so much for in almost an instant. This sequence does impact Leaf in a profound way. While subtle, Leaf's character changes to become more pragmatic. He still maintains his noble ideals, but he will not necessarily go out of his way to save everyone. This development can be seen in Endgame, where at the prospect of his closest friends dying, despite him hoping it won't come to that, he accepts that it may be a necessary inevitability. Whew, went on a bit of a tangent there. What was I originally talking about? Oh yeah, this really should have been Leaf who said this to Alir. Heck, the party got Leaf only 2 chapters ago. He's the most recent emblem you have in your party up to this point. This would have been the perfect time to show this side of Leaf, both for fans of Thracia and for people who never even heard of him so they can get a sense of his character. But nope, had to be Marth, just had to be. Anyway, we get to the castle, and then we have this whole misunderstanding trope with Hortensia thinking you killed her sister, yada yada, whatever. And then the game wants us to feel sad about the death of King Morian? But there are a couple problems with that. For one, this is a character we literally just met 2 chapters ago. That's not nearly enough time for us to get invested in his character. But also, King Morian doesn't do anything that endears us to him. He's incredibly forgettable. I have yet to see someone even mention him when they talk about Engage. This man is certainly no Emerin. In fact, a lot of his screen time is just spent foreshadowing his death, and not in a good way. Check out this line right here.
It's all right, Diamant. If I die, I die. Brodia will live on.
But, Father...
What? You don't believe me? After I'm gone, I know you will lead with a steady hand. Though, I'm offended you expect that day to come so soon.
Now, what he says here, in the right context, isn't necessarily bad. Pragmatism, when done right, is an endearing character trait. It can work well, especially in a grounded fantasy-type setting such as Game of Thrones and, well, other Fire Emblem games. This is not one of those Fire Emblem games. Plus, he gets killed in the very next cutscene. Well, basically killed. He gets turned into a corrupted, but it's the same thing. He basically is just killed here. This makes it seem like this line is less about making Morian seem pragmatic, and more just the writers throwing subtlety out the window and screaming, "Lol, this character's going to die, aren't we so clever with our foreshadowing?" The fact that he gets killed literally in the next cutscene, combined with that line, it almost comes off unintentionally as King Morian not even caring if he dies or not. He's basically just like, if I die, whatever, you'll be King Diamant, but I won't die though. And then he immediately dies after saying that. So if Morian doesn't care about his own death, the writers don't care, this doesn't really affect Diamant or Alchrist's character growth moving forward. So why should I, as a player, care about his death? The answer? I do not. So anyway, we beat chapter 10, then oh no, the evil guy gets eaten by the even more evil main villain guy. Oh no, the lowly waifu is secretly evil. Not saying the Veil secretly being evil, for now. Plot twist was predictable. I'm not really the best judge of that kind of thing, it's more just I really wasn't paying much attention to the earlier scenes with Alear and Veil. They are so painfully cheesy and cringe that I just did not care about Veil at all. So this plot just fell a bit flat with me. Then we get the dumb anime trope of the main character getting distracted and all the MacGuffins, emblem rings, get stolen. And now for the real meat of this sequence. The next chapter has a rainy aesthetic, the music is somber, the characters' dialogues and interactions point to a very sorrowful and helpless tone. The writers, clear as day, want the player to feel sad here. But what is there to get sad about? It can't be over King Morian's death, nor over the dragon waifu turning out to be evil for the reasons I just went over. Could it be the loss of the emblem rings? Definitely not. For one, it's fairly obvious that we will get them all back considering how integral they are to the gameplay, the long list of skills, the fact you keep the DLC rings, the intro sequence showing all the rings and characters working together, the paralogs existing which you find out about right after this chapter, etc. So it's clear this loss is temporary, which lowers its impact. But also, why should I care about empty husks of characters who do not contribute to the story at all besides shouting references from their game? Even Marth, the emblem who gets the most screen time up to this point, has done absolutely nothing noteworthy to endear me to his character. If this were Shadow Dragon Marth, maybe this would be a different story, but this iteration of Marth, like the other emblems, is an empty husk version of himself. I cannot think of one noteworthy thing he did at all up to this point, besides just spout generic anime nonsense. The only vaguely interesting thing he did was say a line that should have gone to Leaf in the first place, but I already ranted enough about that. And therein lies the main problem with this sequence and why it fails on every conceivable level. The writers clearly want me to feel sad here, but I simply cannot find anything to be sad about. I even said to myself when I got to this sequence, I guess I'm supposed to be sad now? It really took me out of the narrative because while it was clear as day the writers were going for this big, dramatic, sad sequence, they utterly failed to build up to that point and earn that moment. The foundation they built to have this moment was incredibly weak and easily crumbles under its own weight. As a result, I don't end up feeling sad, I just acknowledge that I'm supposed to feel sad and then just feel absolutely nothing. You know, I think this sequence would have worked a lot better if it tried to emulate Chapter 5 of Thracia. It's a castle escape map where Leaf loses his surrogate mother. The music, environment, and dialogue allude to hints of tragedy, but at the same time, the prevalent vibe is very much, we gotta get the hell out of here. That kind of vibe would have served the narrative here a lot better. Elements of tragedy, but more of a tense, oh no, they got the emblem rings, we gotta get the hell out of here kind of feeling. That also would have merged better with the gameplay here as well, as gameplay-wise, we see how dangerous the emblem rings are when they are used against us in this chapter, and thus we would have the same sense of urgency the characters would have here. That way, they can keep the plot and map design the same, and they would just have to change the music to be less sad and more tense, change the backdrop from this rainy outside area to another interior Destinia cathedral map, and then change some of the dialogue. But as is, what it's going for with this overly mopey and depressing vibe, and in terms of what it's trying to emulate, it simply does not work at all. Anyway, there's one last line I want to talk about, just because there are layers of utter stupidity to this line.
My mother told me that a divine dragon should never run away.
Alright, 1. You lost your memory and knew this person for less than a day. She also immediately got herself killed. Not really the best person to be taking advice from. Plus, you don't have to take Lumera's advice at complete face value without any nuance or critical thinking. I'm pretty sure she just meant it in a never give up and overcome adversity kind of way. Not a throw yourself head first into every dangerous situation kind of way. And if she did mean it in the throw yourself into dangerous situations way, well then, both of them are extremely dumb. Alright, I have lost way too many brain cells analyzing this sequence, and I didn't have much brain cells left to begin with, so I have to stop here. Plus, this is all just making the immense disappointment and anger I felt here come rushing back. I'll be real, I was kind of vibing with Engage's story up to this point. It wasn't perfect, but it was serviceable enough to at least be mildly enjoyable. But then this sequence utterly infuriated me. Not only is it terrible on its own merits, but it is an absolute insult and disgrace to the masterpiece it tries to emulate. Luckily, nothing this bad happens in the story again. The story gets kind of boring up to a certain point, and then it just goes completely off the rails and just devolves into absolute insanity. But that is what I will go into in my next video. I'll see you all then. Peace.